Good evening and welcome to Plain Talk. Thank you for joining me for the next hour as we discuss issues concerning our society. And this evening, I'm privileged and honored to have on our program two women quite capable, good achievers, wonderful views and perspective of our society. Let me immediately welcome Ms. Danuta Radzik from the extreme left, a women's rights advocate, and Ms. Nazima Raghubir, who has just been elected head of the Ghana Press Association, the first woman to hold elected office as head of the Press Association in 73 years. Now that says something about our society, but I still want to extend real congratulations to you, Nazima.
Thank you,
I think
Mr.
you
Ram.
deserve it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Danuta, thank you for joining us this evening, and I know you had an operation on your eye. I hope the lights are not too much of a strain.
It's okay. I'm just have my glasses on because, yeah, sometimes the glare is a bit much. So, I'm okay, but
women are as much part of a society as any other sector. Probably many will say it's as important as anything. I was reading a couple of nights ago when the women went on strike. Was it in Finland? And then they did all ceased work officially in out of the home, in the home, and it was total chaos. It's now one of the freest societies as far as women are concerned. How far are we from there?
We're still very far away from there. There's still a lot of barriers to be broken. There are still a lot of places that women need to get to. I mean, just being part of the media itself and heading the GPA after 73 years, a woman being elected. There was a woman there before, but she was not elected, but she acted as president.
The first substantive.
Being elected. It just shows you that still there are a lot of barriers to be broken. We still need a lot of women in decision-making roles. The women are there. Why they're not being given the opportunities, why they're not being seen as leaders, probably will take a whole other discussion or a whole other introspection before we can get answers. But it is probably going to happen not with me, but with people like me being elected or moving up and providing that story or storyline to other women out there looking on and saying, you know, I can do this, and, you know, I can be part of this, and I can push myself to greater heights.
Danuta, what's your view on this? Press Association and the first woman.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's wonderful that happened. And the more that we have women in positions of leadership, I think would be better for the advancement of women and the empowerment of women. Because we know that any woman that you see in a position of leadership, you know that they probably had to work 2 times to 3 times to 4 times as hard to get elected to that position. And when they are in that position, they are scrutinized much more carefully than men are, and scrutinized in every aspect, right? Or job, in terms of what they wear, etc. I mean, it's really amazing
that is one of the points I made this morning when I was talking to the Antiguan Observer, that this is the first time in the history that I remember of the press associations that so many women have been elected to the executive. There are 5 of us.
Out of how many?
There are 5 out of 8 of us. Outside of that, I mean, the challenges are different for women in decision-making roles. All of a sudden, you will be scrutinized, as you said, what you're wearing, how you speak. I might be going to fetch water in a bucket every day, but as soon as I become, you know, popular, you know, in an elected office, that is an action that is going to be criticized for whatever reason. Yes. So the challenges are very different for women in decision-making roles.
And then, you know, of course, there the inbuilt biases that usually are associated with women. Oh, we're too emotional, we're not good decision makers, we can't be tough enough, but all of those things, which are seen sometimes as negatives. But the point is that women tend to be more collective in decision making, which in fact is a better way to enhance and to have a successful organization. So some of those same things that women are criticized from are in fact strengths in building, and giving leadership to an organization.
But those things you mentioned as that are held as negatives, those are not supported by, but they're not supported by empirical evidence.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's just as you said, it's biases.
It still exists, it still exists. These things, they are so entrenched in the psyche of people, and they're passed on from generation to generation, because you see it happening as girls and boys are socialized. You see it happening. You see some of those traditional views of women even coming through in younger people, especially as when they become adolescents and so on. Even though I do think it's getting better, and our boys...
But isn't it too slowly?
I feel
maybe
it's
too slowly. Yes, too slowly. But as I said, the barriers are there, gender is there. It's both structural and it's also ideological. And that goes very, very deep, in the society. And not only in Guyana, you have similar problems. I mean, other countries, more advanced than us, but they have similar problems also in terms of leadership, women's participation, decision making, etc.
But those ought not to be any reason why we need to be like this.
True.
I keep being reminded of women's position in the private sector commission in their office. They have photographs of every single president for decades, and not a single woman. That's more than bias, isn't it? How do you explain something like that, Nazima?
Very few organizations have taken it upon themselves to ensure that there is a certain percentage of women representation on their boards or in their organizations. And maybe at some point in time that is a route we ought to examine, whether or not we should pressure some groups and bodies and organizations that we need to have a certain percentage of women on your thing. A couple of years ago, in discussion with a very young woman professional in this country, she referred to I think it was the PSC as an all boys club, and many of us still see it that way. Man or woman would see it that way, and maybe that is why sometimes your membership or even your own interaction can be limited if you're not as diverse as you ought to be. One of the things I said this morning, even though being elected the first woman to the Guyana Press Association is what it is, at the same time I have to understand that I represent members of the media who are of different sexuality, of different gender, of different ethnic background, outside of being a woman. And it comes with that recognition that I am from a society that has multiple features, and we have to start understanding that.
How do we promote a greater awareness and a greater advancement of women's interests?
Well, I think
whose responsibility is it?
Everybody has a responsibility. But let me go back to something that was in the manifesto of the present government. And that was that there would be a gender policy very soon. I think it was in the first 100 days, or very soon, in the first 3 months after they if they were elected to be government. That policy, we are still waiting on it. They've gone some way towards it, but I think it goes to show that an issue which would have probably impacted women greatly was not seen as a priority. And I think this is what happens, is that these issues that people considered soft issues, like issue of social issues, violence, being caregivers, etc. Those things are not given the value and the status that other things are given, and therefore they're not considered important. Even though, I mean, what is more important than growing and raising children to be productive members of society and to be able to fulfill their potential? What is more important than that? Yet, very often that aspect, and within that aspect, one of the things that needs to be there, even in the school curriculum, etc., but that's another big story, is, education on gender, education on how gender influences certain things, and education on other social issues, so that children grow up respecting, being able to respect each other in a better way, know how to behave, how to problem solve without resorting to violence and cussing out and so on. Because, I mean, one thing that we can see in our society, and especially in the political sphere, is that we seem to have a lot of difficulty in being able to disagree with each other without it becoming a brawl, as we saw in the parliament. And I just want to, because I've told the story to a few people, one of the organizations I work with, we're working in a school, and at the end of the term there was a school party, and somebody did come from the Ministry of Social Protection, and she had come from Parliament. So she asked the children if they knew where she came from. She explained it was the National Assembly Parliament, and she asked them what do they know and what happens in Parliament, and they said fight and rape. They shouted it out, and I think it's a wake-up call, that eyes are on us, the eyes of our children are also on us as leaders and decision makers, and the example we set is very important to them. So
Nazima, you have a particularly important role now as head of the Press Association. But I want to raise a couple issues, and I've written extensively on this matter, women on boards, and the other day I saw the photograph of Bank CIH board. I think there are about 13 directors. There's one woman who is an employee of the group, so it's not an independent, and that's not a unique situation. You say there's some progress at the political level, but the president, the prime minister, all the vice presidents, practically all the political leaders are men. So if one were to use the objective yardsticks, it becomes very difficult. The issue of equal pay for equal work. What do we know about that? What ought we to know about it, and what are we doing about it, Nazima?
I'm going to ask you to take a go at this, having more experience.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the real problems with Ghana is our lack of data. We don't collect enough data, and even if it's collected, sometimes it's treated as if it's a state secret, so that we collect it, but we cannot let the population know about these things. Even though, if you want to make change, first you have to know what exists. Otherwise, how do you make informed decisions? But saying that, as far as I know, Ghana, like pretty much most countries in the world and so on, women do get paid less for men for equal work.
And this is where we really need to have an idea of what is going on with this gender policy. We will need.
But we don't have a gender
We
policy.
don't have a gender policy.
3
but
years
these
after the
are
government
some of the
committed to doing
issues.
it.
These are some of the issues that obviously are going to be right there on top. Look at Angela working here tonight. I mean, doing so many things.
Angela, you can take a bow.
Having a career elsewhere. Is she being adequately compensated for all the work that she is, putting in? She's a technical person. She's an editor. She's a teacher. And
She directs plain talk.
more than likely, you're gonna hear somebody else who's doing exactly the same thing, but is another gender, is probably going to, be paid more.
Or certainly be treated differently.
And be treated differently. And that discussion has to start. I'm tired of saying from the top to the bottom, because I think all of us at the bottom have been talking about issues like this for a very long time. We're not the decision makers. The decision makers have to get serious about things like these.
I come back though. So who must put this on the agenda?
Everybody has to put it on
So-
the agenda.
So
The
and if the men
media-
don't want to do it because it's maybe they can't see it. They're so accustomed to this as a man's world. Does anyone notice that there is not a single vice president in the entire government?
Yeah, women certainly notice that. I think
But they're not saying anything.
Well,
And they come out
well,
and support.
yeah,
They support
yeah.
the same thing.
I am not sure it's not about saying anything. Because there are many spheres that
Well,
we can
what are
talk
they,
about.
but who is talking about it? If we're saying these matters are not being raised, the question is who must raise them, where and how?
I think they're ranked on the level of importance. I mean, frankly speaking, people are concerned with earning, and people are concerned where their next meal is going to come from. And some of these issues, as you have alluded to, are not deemed as important everyday thing that people see. There needs to be that re-education, and I really don't know who will do it. I can tell you that the media recognizes that it has a role to play, but there is so much that we can do. And it's the same thing that I've said ad nauseum. Civil society has a role to play. The churches have a role to play. The churches can't be selective in condemning or selective in when they need to advocate and all of that. All of these bodies have a role to play in calling for more advocacy on issues like these.
Well, let me raise another issue where surely women would predominantly be the victim. This is the question of sexual misconduct at the workplace. We know it's a big thing in the more developed countries, but it's pretty big in our societies, except they're not treated significantly. We just think that, oh, you can make a joke with any woman. Or
Yeah, it's the most ridiculous sexism culture that we have in the Caribbean.
In the Caribbean, indeed.
where songs are made and they're thought to be funny and they have sexual innuendos. People, and I would say aloud, because I mean, you've heard stories of girls in uniforms being teased by big men down the road, and women are standing there, thinking it's funny or not saying anything. It's just a ridiculous, nasty culture. I can speak from my own experience. I mean, even having ascended to this presidency, I can tell you a quarter of what was supposed to be congratulatory messages from men, I could not take seriously, because I apparently am an object, and whatever else, the election and whatever else has happened is of no concern to them. They don't see that, and I am just a very small fraction. I mean, can you imagine other women?
And you're an enlightened
yeah.
person.
Other women who are in similar positions or not, who have to face this. A lot of workplaces need to really think about things like these. Adopt what you call the anti-harassment clauses and stuff like that, but nobody is going to do that because they don't feel that it's something that they need to do, or that they need to highlight, or their employees need to benefit from.
Right. So the thing on the sexual harassment is that It's a big issue in Ghana. It's a big issue in every country. If we,
But that doesn't in any way. You keep saying that, but to me, that seems to soften the fact that it exists so strongly in Ghana.
Well, as strong as anywhere else, and I think in the Caribbean, which is a place that has been recognized, has one of the highest rates of sexual abuse in the world, right? And recognizing that, one has, of course, what that speaks to is that there's a high level and a high tolerance to also sexual harassment in the workplace, in the school, wherever, because it's like a form of sexual abuse, which is what sexual harassment is, and we know the figures are there. The Caribbean has one of the highest, I think the second highest in the world.
What are we as a country doing about it?
Right. So, what do we have in place? We have the laws in place. We even have the Discrimination Act, and one of the things in it, I think it has something that pertains to sexual harassment, but it's very difficult to utilize that because it's a civil action thing, right? You would have to get a lawyer. Who's going to do that? An ordinary person who's been sexually harassed in her workplace would never choose that option. So we have called upon repeatedly, Chris, that what you need besides the law, or if there's some agencies that want a law on sexual harassment, but beside all of that, each workplace, right, if it's a school, a private sector, a public sector, or whatever, the police force, the army, wherever, should have a policy on prevention of sexual harassment, where it explains what it is, right? What would be the procedures if someone makes a complaint, right? And what would be the consequences?
In many cases, that the behavior comes from the top. So the employer is not going to. Now what if you
No. But Chris, let me finish, right? Now, even if it comes from the top, what you need is a system, is a process that will also guard against that.
My question is this,
right?
Again, I ask
because there's always a solution to something, but the thing is, you have to make steps. You have to make first steps. So, what I'm saying is that in order to reduce something, you first have to influence people's thinking, and then behavior,
my question is, where is that happening? Where is that influencing? You see, look, a couple nights ago.
Socialization.
A couple nights ago. No, it's okay to say that. But a couple nights ago, Oprah Winfrey, at the award ceremony, was regarded as the outstanding personality for the night because she spoke of that issue and she said never again. In other words, Angela Jolie, lots of women, which is why people like Harvey is now in so much trouble, because there are people who were prepared to come out and say not anymore.
What I'm going to say is that cultural shift, and I'm going to say a cultural shift because there's so many things tied to that. There is corruption tied to that. There is the fact that people are lazy and are not willing to work tied to that. And there is this
explain that one to me, please.
That we have a culture where, people don't, between 9 to 5, they go to work to relax, and you go there and you still have to pay them to do their jobs. Mm-hmm. That is something that I've only experienced here. We have a culture where we always we don't support the victim, we always supporting the accused. And if we go back to that story where it was alleged that the pastor was caught in some sex videos and whatever, nobody looked at whether or not these women were manipulated into, if there was some sort of economic a sabotage or economic oppression being happening there. Nobody looked at them as victims. Yet look at how society dealt with it, laughing about it.
Yeah.
People laughed about it and make story and made fun over something like that. Look at how look at how we're dealing with issues when it comes to homosexuals and transsexuals. And so people are going to go to the National Cultural Center and look at and laugh at jokes that are being written in scripts about stuff like this, or even about sexual abuse and domestic violence. They're going to go there and laugh. But have a referendum and ask them to come out to vote on these issues. They're not going to come out and vote on these issues. And we have to recognize that there has to be a cultural shift if we have to address a lot of these things. I know I've had, these discussions before, and people said, oh, a lot of it is rooted in ethnic groups and your ethnicity and where you grew up with and stuff, where it was fine that a 45-year-old marry a 13-year-old girl, and we have moved away from all of that. This is a country where I have seen sexual violence over the years, when it is the friend of a politician and when it is the financier of a political party, being treated very differently from the man down the road accused of rape. You don't see, that financier, or you don't see that friend of the politician pictures, flashed in the media because he's charged. You will never hear that he's charged. And that is the reality of how we deal with things.
Yeah, but the thing is that you have to make a start, right? And anything starts with people learning about things, being educated, understanding that this is wrong. Because I will tell you, you go down the road and you take a mic and you ask people if you think this, what we would consider to be sexual harassment, anything wrong with that?
Yeah.
No, because some people genuinely don't believe nothing wrong with that, because they've been socialized in that kind of way.
Well, some people, you remind me of
hold
on, let me finish.
And
some people would see nothing wrong with beating a child.
Exactly.
It is totally wrong, and we will stop it.
Exactly right.
So why would we accept one form and not another?
No, but beating is as bad as it. All of these social, domestic violence, sexual harassment, beating children, all of these things continue to be big problems in our society. However, I do think that some progress has been made, right? Some progress has been made, and there have been groups that have worked tirelessly for years, effecting that change, but it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop.
This sexual harassment, where do you see the progress that we've made?
The sexual harassment
yes,
thing?
and sexual innuendos and...
Well, with the sexual harassment thing...
Other than legislation.
Yeah, but Chris, let me answer, right? Right, the sexual harassment thing, right, has resurfaced because of what happened in the United States of America.
You think so?
Oh, yes. I think it has affected the world, because women being killed and so on, we might not look at it, a lot of people don't look at that, they don't think all over the world. But when you have film star, when you got these, especially the media people and people in film and so on, everybody knows them in Ghana, they watch them on the TV, and when they see that women have spoken out, and let us not forget, even in the United States of America, how difficult it was for the women to speak out. How they did, it was not automatic in some cases, where they were even believed. It meant that they had to have a lot of other support and so on. So we know that these are big battles, and that's the point, Chris. That's why we're having this conversation. Why don't women advance? Because all of these things affect our advancement. All of these things which are really important. Domestic violence, women get affected much more. Sexual harassment, women get affected more. Stuff for like support and so on for caregiver, for looking after children, looking after the home, and all these things are not considered priorities, right? And very often, and what that means is that the funding and the economic part of that, is not given its due then.
At the end of the day, a woman is going to weigh the pros and the cons of speaking out or even reporting sexual harassment or sexual misconduct. You have to calculate the time, the pressure, the stress, everything that is related with that.
Police force.
Everything. The time that it is going to invest, and you know our court systems, our policing system is not easy to deal with. You're talking about months of cases being dragged out, and it is not encouraging to anybody, much less in the workplace where possibility exists that is your only income at some point in time, that you don't have a lot of support elsewhere, and that is sometimes the reality of women working.
But you know, Chris, let me just say this, because this happened, I don't know, about 3 years ago. There was a reception somewhere that I attended, and there was a young woman who worked at a big private sector company in Guyana, and she was asked to speak. And part of what she spoke about is that that company had a sexual harassment policy in place, and she was able to utilize it because she was being sexually harassed by someone in a senior position for them, and they were actually disciplined. And this is 3 years ago, and I'm saying, I mean, I know you're saying this, but I'm saying that workplaces should have that in place. And once women and men, because part of what you have to do before the policy is educate people.
Can I ask you, which place of employment and you're free to say the one you talk about, has an anti-harassment policy, written policy?
When you say anti-harassment, because you see, anti-harassment can be very wide, which is the other thing.
Well, you just have said you have a policy. Well,
right, but it was on sexual harassment, but there's discrimination, ethnic.
No, anti-sexual harassment. That's the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, well, that's the one.
Which company you?
Well, I'm not going
to. How many companies you know?
Well, I'm saying that I was there and I heard.
You know of one.
I know of one, but let's come back to the gender policy, because I don't know what is going to come out of that. They had some consultations, but there was no document that anyone has seen in draft as yet.
Can I ask you, who's heading that policy?
Who's heading it?
Yeah.
Well, the Ministry of Social Protection, there's a unit there who's supposed to be doing this. They're supposed to be doing this, right?
I have no idea.
I quite frankly wouldn't be surprised if it was some man heading it. I'm probably not getting the work.
I understand, that there was a consultant and so on. As far as I know, it was a female consultant. But once again, now that is where you put something in saying sexual harassment will not be tolerated in any
which of course
part
has to
of
be,
Guyana,
but it has
and
to be
so
defined.
on.
It has to be defined.
Yeah, but everybody knows it's not hard to define.
No. It's
Right.
It is hard to
but
define.
But what I'm saying is that, you see, you have to start somewhere, and even though I know that sometimes it's really hard, and you feel that maybe not a lot of progress is being made, etc., I still think that people have worked really hard, and I do think we're better than we were a few years ago. I don't think it's been good enough. I don't think that the movement and the changes have been transformative enough, right? But the more people that you get involved with it, and the more you have...
I want to get on to some specifics.
Sorry.
Some specifics. I have heard lots of times, and Danuta, you've probably heard of this as well, let's get a gender budget.
Oh yes, that's another big thing. Good.
This is absolutely the essence of whatever policy you have. How far have we progressed on this other than talking?
I'll let you have a go at it.
Well, I do know that because I've been at discussions at the Ministry of Finance with the decision makers there about gender budgeting, the need for gender budgeting, and so on. And it was more or less accepted. I don't think any of the decision makers, including the finance minister, had any objection to it. And there was even, I think, some attempts to suggest various places right? Various resources which could be used as a guide for doing something like that in Guyana, right? I mean, there are people who go and get trained to do gender budgeting, etc. We had presented a few ways in which it could be done, but of course we're not experts as such. But what I'm saying is that that discussion has been there, but nothing has happened.
Discussion. You see, I'm moving this beyond discussion. We can keep talking. What is in effect happening? Why can't we? And I think you would accept. You don't have to have the perfect situation, but you can say, okay, this measure is designed to help this women or whichever disadvantaged group is going to be the beneficiary of this system. So if the Minister of Finance and if Cabinet, because you've got all these brains in Cabinet, surely they can prepare it if they really wish. We keep talking about discussion, which is what men are very good at.
Well, I absolutely agree with you, Chris. I don't believe that that there's enough commitment, right, on the part of decision makers for doing this thing. Because if gender budgeting was a priority, it would be done. And we know that, and we come back to the whole situation of women and the status of women, etc., in society, right? But it is not for the want of sections of Guyanese society continuing to speak, advocate, protest, etc., for these things, right? It is not one for that.
I hate to say this, but maybe it would get some amount of recognition if the donors start making it an explicit clause in whatever financing arrangements they're making. I mean, that is how, some issues, were kept on the front burner for a long time. And maybe these are one of the things I hate, to go down that road and say that. Maybe then is when the decision makers will, decide that, this is something we have to do because we have to tick it off, at the end of the day.
Which, of course, is both an admission and a condemnation of our own society.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm glad
Nazima?
Nazima is here because the press, I know, and I must say, I know the press gets a lot of criticism, etc., but so on and so on. But at the end of the day,
at least they haven't reached the stage of fake news.
The press continues to inform the Guyanese public about the state of affairs of many things which are, which we should know, right? Which is our duty to know and should be, made available to us. So they have a lot of power, and I think, as you hear, maybe dealing with some of these things like gender budgeting, maybe go in and ask, oh gosh, what's her name? She's in charge of gender budgeting herself in the Ministry of Finance.
Raghubir?
Sonia
Roop.
She's not responsible for gender budgeting. She's the
for
director
budgeting director, right. Sonia Roop, not about what is happening with it, because I know she was not, she seemed to be quite open to it. And once again, we come back to our gender policy, because that should be in it, that within the finance and so on, there must be a recognition that whatever funds are allocated to wherever and to whatever, emphasis must be placed on how this will affect the advancement of women and women being able to fulfill the roles that they are supposed to fulfill.
Do you think the members of the government do enough, and maybe which ones, to promote women's issues?
Well, from my own personal point of view, I've never felt so over the years that I've been a member of the media, and if I must say, I've had the same discussion with other people. I am privy, and quite sadly so, to a lot of heckling sometimes in Parliament, and what is said on the floor especially when it comes to women issues. Like, I have seen a young politician sitting at the backbench of the former government and is making a gesture with his tongue like a blowjob to another member on the floor. I've heard things that are being said that are not captured by the mics. And that, for me, is the true representation of some of the people, not all of the people. I've seen very respectful comments and I've seen very respectful exchanges, but I've also heard things that are not necessarily on the floor. And I've also seen the way that certain issues have been treated over the years. Look at the former First Lady and the former President. And one member of Parliament who was a senior decision making in the government at the time saying that is really man and woman affair. When it was more of an economic abuse on a woman for so many years. And look at so many other things sometimes, how the politicians deal with it. I remember interviewing the president a couple of years ago, I think 2015, and asking why there were not many women representatives. And I remember he always makes this statement about experience. You cannot substitute experience. But I did ask, I think I asked Mrs. Hughes at a press conference before she was minister, why more women are not taking up leadership positions. I can't remember her verbatim comment, but I remember something along the line of the challenges, which is what we were discussing here, to climb that leadership ladder.
But they're in a position to do something about it.
They are in a position, I agree with that. They are in a position to do something about it. I would like to see how the formula for electing, your members of your list come 2020 is going to work out, when nobody, like the opposition, is going to just put somebody there for a figurehead like they did in the last something, but you're going to have a serious woman politician or serious women in politics who are going to rise to the top and start leading these parties.
Yeah, and I think that local government is usually a good place to start, but unfortunately, the local government system, which was supposed to
Empower
take political parties out of the equation, at the last one we had after so many years, even at the level of individual candidates, right? The political parties, they actually not supported, but they actually put forward their own candidates. So even that little space that was there for individual representation was grabbed once again by political parties, right? So, but I think it's a good place for women to start, because they usually tend to be very active in their communities in many ways. We know that women are very good managers. They are excellent at finance, because any woman who has to survive on $80,000 or $50,000 and feed her family and,
has to be a magician.
Sustain them is a genius, right? So we know all of these skills that women, they're very good at, they're better at conflict resolution and, and they work collectively.
You point out that the politicians often help to neutralize any initiatives. Yet these politicians
are empowered
draw
from
support
women.
and are empowered by women.
Yes.
How do you explain that?
Well, it's like the church too. Who goes to church? Women go to church.
No. I still ask, how do you explain that?
Huh?
How do you explain that?
Well, I think
masochism.
I don't know. I think it tends to vary. I don't know, because I'm not
think
really,
at some point in
I
time,
can't really
and I think I've been in that position where you don't understand your power. You also dilute your strength,
Yes.
and that is of your own doing. And I think a lot of that happens over time. And people say, look, okay, she wants to do it, yeah, or he wants to do it. Yeah, I can just give them my support or whatever. Because even in the local government race, I saw a lot of people throwing in their hats very early when they realized that the parties were, people were eager to run and whatever, and then the parties were like, oh, we're going to run out. Some people were like, all right, maybe
well, the
I should
parties
just,
practically dominated everything.
So,
yeah, but then you have, I mean, the last election, what we could
But
look at
we
is
said,
the whole
we said
youth thing.
parties, in which a lot of women sit down around the table.
Yeah, but
and
then they never get the thing. It's what happened.
What do you mean
to-
they never get the
okay,
what
a lot
thing?
of them would have worked hard, and yet when it comes for position and so on, they are not put forward. And this happened. We know this happened
When
to
you say they're
youth.
not put forward, by whom? By the men?
Well,
By who?
well, the leaders of the party
By the men.
decide. Yeah, the men decide
The men who they
they
support.
put into
And this is what I'm saying.
decision-making
supporting
positions.
They're supporting their own relegation into positions of insignificance. That's the point I'm making. Where they can be juggled around and moved around by the very men that they're supporting.
Yeah, that is true. I think a lot of women, however, truth be told, are very put off by politics, especially party politics. That's one, and taking up leadership positions in that because of the nature of it, right? And so I think it's a kind of turn off to women. We know that, as we started off by saying, if they do that, they tend to be, criticized more within the structures of cabinet and those kind of things. We know that it's a fight to be heard and to be respected for your opinions and so on. We know about tokenism, etc. But it's it's difficult all the way around. I think that since we represent 50% of the population, all the lists 50% should be women. But once again, you have to structurally put things in place to allow women to assume this.
What you're saying, you have to ask the men to allow us to put things in place.
But it comes back, Mr. Ram, to what I said earlier. Women are going to weigh the options. Do I want to run for, the councillor of South and have somebody just read into my sexual history and use it against me? Because these are things that happen. Or, find out that I gave up a child for adoption or something like that.
Which is one of the problems in our society, again, where we started. If a woman were to have a number of relationships, she is all kinds of words.
Yeah.
If a man does, oh, he's a real man.
Yeah.
So it's our society. Now, I want to turn to, and let me put you on the spot. Do you think the media, and I believe Danuta hinted at this, do you think the media does enough to promote gender issues? Particularly women's
I can
issues?
tell you that we have not done our best over the years. And I know from my former boss right down to the last president of the Press Association, we have tried to work with some media houses to ensure that the image of women and the images are treated differently. It has to be a work in progress. I can tell you generally, media houses are under-resourced. And that is the reality not only here but in the region. And an example I gave at our meeting on Sunday is that we're being asked to ensure that we cover violence in a certain way. We're being asked to treat victims of violence in a certain way. We're being asked to be advocates for people living with HIV. We're being asked to be sensitive to, different issues. At the same time, we're being asked to hold governments accountable, cover the fire down the road, run behind, the bandit who robbed somebody. And this is the reality of every media house here. I don't ever think that we're doing enough, but I also recognize the reality of certain places. And let's not take the responsibilities of some of the heads of media houses or publishing thing. I mean, there have been instances where that a story that includes a woman that has been treated a certain way because, you know, somebody said, I don't believe she. And it has been treated a different way. There are so many things that we can do, and there are so many things that we ought to do. It all comes down to whether or not, as a collective, we are willing to do them.
And I think, I mean, what some reporters have told us also is that even if sometimes, yeah, they might want to cover something maybe in a different way, there's, you know, they want to do a story. The editor says, don't worry with that. We want to sell our newspapers, and what to sell in our newspapers is crime, sex, violence, and so on. These are the things that people are buying the newspaper to hear, you know, not about the advancement of women. And that is so you know, there are a lot of reasons why this thing happens. And I think, I mean, if we look at, because I know we haven't come down to lawyers and courts and so on, but the majority of magistrates in this country are women.
Yes.
The majority of lawyers are women. The majority of students studying law in the Caribbean are women all over. And yet, right here in Ghana, we've had the situation where our acting chancellor, right, as we understand it, is not going to be, you know, accepted.
Not only acting chancellor, but the acting chief justice.
And the acting chief justice, right, are not going to have their positions, you know, made.
Should our society accept that kind of position? Now, these are women who were recognized, given very high national awards, some of this because of office, but no question they deserved it equally. And here is a man, whether president or not, a man saying, look, I want a change of personnel. Is this acceptable?
Well, you know, we're on record as having written a letter where we think that it was completely unfair. We think that the whole issue of gender and gender discrimination and the status of women, I think it speaks to that in volumes, right? She was the most senior person to have that thing. We understand that the bar.
You keep speaking of one. Are you distinguishing between
no,
one and the other?
No, I'm not distinguishing between
one
or the other.
You said she.
But
yes.
Both of them, of course, both of them. You know, and for us, we know that they have advanced the situation of women, especially those victims of violence, women, children, whoever, substantially. They have been so active, they've done so much in that short space of time where they have been acting chancellor and chief justice. And I don't think you want anything better than that. We've had, you know, chancellors, our acting chancellors and so on, who for 10 years, 5 years, 12 years, how long, have not managed to achieve and to be as active as these two women in such a short period of time. You know, their judgments and so on have been upheld, you know, so on every level they're absolutely, you know.
Has the Press Association taken a position on it?
No, we have not.
Is it going to be taking a position on this?
I mean, we don't plan to. I mean, that is not...
Do you see yourselves only as purveyors of news or helping to shape?
No, I mean, we have...
And part of civil society?
We have a large membership that we have to represent at the end of the day. You have to understand we have our own battles. For instance, we need
but you lead from the front, not behind.
We need to be calling on the president for more engagement with the media.
Yes.
For instance, we've only had one press conference
very limited
last year. So
well.
I mean, our battles are very different while understanding that these things exist, and I think that is where the media comes in. The media has been playing such a role in coverage in this country. We have seen the change of governments. We have actually held governments accountable. And when people talk about investigative reporting and stuff like that, and you would notice you pick up the newspaper sometimes, and that is your source of information. The letters to the editor, the editorials, even ads are there challenging, and that is the role of the media. At the end of the day, I'm going to say this about the what seems to be the non-appointment of the Chancellor and Chief Justice, that there's nothing in the public domain that says why they should not be appointed. There's nothing. I have seen nothing. And, sometimes I think it is issues like these that are being covered in the press that ought to be used. That coverage itself is enough to activate more people to say, look, I need to speak out. At the end of the day, I think, sometimes we do our jobs, but maybe not as effective as, if people are not, taking the issues up and said, well, it ought to be addressed.
Do you think the media give enough room for women columnists, women contributors, women's issues?
I am going to be very biased and say no. There will never be enough coverage. But I do know at the end of the day, the decision is probably more than likely a financial one. Where the
women are not financial liabilities, are they?
No, I'm talking about where the advertising pie comes in, and where
women are
they're
some of
going
the
to spending.
women make many of the consuming decisions.
I am going to agree with you right there. I am agreeing with you. I don't disagree with you. But at the end of the day, I know some of the media houses they're going to look at where they're going to earn more money. If it's going to be a full-page ad, or whether or not they have to pay a columnist to write on black cake. But I do want to encourage, I've had this discussion many times. I encourage women. There are so many other tools out there. Write, blog. Use a lot of the free tools out there to express yourself. Only few of them have taken them up, but I think, as you've said, these are things that, they're good. They're starting, somewhere.
We didn't have any time to discuss women health issues, and because I wanted to ask you, whether you think we as a society budget. I'm being told by my producer director that the program must come to an end.
Yeah.
Ladies, thank you very much. Nazima, once again,
Thank you.
congratulations.
It was a pleasure to be
And
here.
I would like to invite you and members of the executive to come on the program for us to have a specific discussion
Sure.
on the role of the press and
Sure.
women. Thank you. And always, you're
Chris.
always so willing to be a part of Plain Talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Operators and viewers, thank you. Good night. And I'll see you next week.